Penguin Random House Audio presents The Destructionists, the 25-year crack-up of the Republican Party. This is the author, Dana Milbank. For my daughter, Paula, and my stepchildren, Sadie and Jasper, and they shall rebuild the old ruins. Isaiah chapter 61, verse 4. I wish we had been able to obstruct more. Mitch McConnell. Introduction. It began where it ended, on the west front of the United States Capitol. On January 6, 2021, a mob incited by President Donald Trump smashed barriers, overpowered police, and stormed the steps of the Capitol on the side of the rotunda facing the Washington Monument across the mall. The insurrectionists scaled the scaffolding that had been erected on the West Front for President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration en route to sacking the U.S. seat of government for the first time since the War of 1812. Sent with instructions from Trump to fight like hell and a call from Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani for trial by combat, the mob halted Congress's certification of Biden's victory, sending lawmakers fleeing for their lives and hiding under desks. At least 7 people died in the riot and its aftermath, and more than 140 police were hurt. Some 800 insurrectionists, many with ties to white supremacist or violent extremist groups, face charges. The bloody coup attempt shocked the nation, but a sober view of history might have lessened the shock, for the seeds of sedition had been planted earlier, 26 years earlier, in that same spot on the west front of the Capitol. On September 27, 1994, more than 300 Republican members of Congress and congressional candidates gathered where the insurrectionists would one day scale the scaffolding. But on this Sunday morning, they assembled for a nonviolent transfer of power. Bob Michel, the unfailingly genial leader of the House Republican minority for the previous 14 years, had successfully ushered Ronald Reagan's agenda through the House. But he had now been forced into retirement by a rising bomb thrower who threatened to oust Michel as GOP leader if he didn't quit. Newt Gingrich had almost nothing in common with the man he pushed out. Michel was a portrait of civility and decency, a World War II combat veteran who knew that his political opponents were not his enemies and that politics was the art of compromise. Gingrich, by contrast, rose to prominence by forcing the resignation of a Democratic Speaker of the House on what began as mostly false allegations, by smearing another Democratic Speaker with personal innuendo, and by routinely thwarting Michel's attempts to negotiate with Democrats. He had avoided service in Vietnam and regarded Democrats as the enemy, impugning their patriotism and otherwise savaging them nightly on the House floor for the benefit of C-SPAN viewers. My friends, I'll not be able to be with you when you enter that promised land of having that long-sought-after majority control of the House of Representatives, Michel said that morning to the gathered Republicans, who were within striking distance of a majority for the first time in 40 years. I can only stand with you today and see that vision from afar. Minutes later, that vision took on a distinctly dystopian hue. Newt, 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 the candidates and lawmakers chanted. They waved miniature American flags. A pudgy 51-year-old with a helmet of gray hair approached the lectern. The fact is that America is in trouble, Gingrich declared. It is impossible to maintain American civilization with 12-year-olds having babies, 15-year-olds killing each other, 17-year-olds dying of AIDS, and 18-year-olds getting diplomas they can't even read. This is a crisis of our entire civilization. And within a half-mile of this building, these conditions happen in our nation's capital, and they happen in every major city, and they happen in West Virginia, and they happen in most Indian reservations and across this country. The areas mentioned were all Democratic strongholds. The pejoratives piled up in Gingrich's shouted, finger-wagging harangue, collapsing, failed so totally, worried about their jobs, worried about their safety, trust broke down, out of touch, wasteful, dumb, ineffective, out of balance, malaise, drug dealers, pimps, prostitution, crime, barbarism, devastation, human tragedy, chaos and poverty. Recognize that if America fails, our children will live on a dark and bloody planet, Gingrich told them. Somewhere in this catalog of catastrophe, Gingrich signed the Contract with America, a 10-point legislative agenda proposing a balanced budget amendment, congressional term limits, and other reforms. "We've become in danger of losing our own civilization," Gingrich warned. "Today, on these steps, we offer this contract as a first step towards renewing American civilization." Americans had seldom heard a politician talk this way, and certainly not a Speaker of the House. But that's what Gingrich became after the GOP's landslide victory in the Republican Revolution of 1994. The Contract with America made little headway. Only 3 relatively minor provisions, paperwork reduction, became law. But the rise of Gingrich and his shock troops fundamentally altered American government for a generation and counting, and set the United States on a course toward the ruinous politics of today. The epic government failures of the last quarter century can all be traced back to Gingrich and the savage politics he pioneered. 3 impeachments, 2 botched wars and a botched pandemic response, several government shutdowns, a 7-fold increase in the federal debt, a market collapse and the Great Recession, and failure to address crucial matters such as climate change, inequality, and immigration. It's no wonder that there has been a wholesale loss of faith in American democracy. Today, Americans' confidence in virtually all the pillars of a free society, Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, public schools, the media, has declined from where it was in 1994. One of America's 2 major political parties has embraced the big lie that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from Trump, and they have convinced 2/3 of Republican voters, tens of millions of people, to accept this democracy-killing fiction. A ferocious, racialized, and sometimes violent partisanship has consumed us. White nationalist and anti-government violence is spreading, and a significant chunk of the country is living in a parallel universe of alternative facts and conspiracy theories. The CIA's Political Instability Task Force ranks countries from the most autocratic, -10, to the most democratic, +10, to predict the likelihood of civil war. Using the same data series, political scientist Barbara Walter, who served on the CIA task force during the Trump years, calculated that the United States had dropped from +10 before Trump's rise to +5, its lowest since 1801. The United States is now technically an anocracy, somewhere between a democracy and an autocracy, after a precipitous decline that puts us at greatly increased risk of civil war. "We are closer to civil war than any of us would like to believe," Walter writes in her 2022 book, How Civil Wars Start. Or maybe the Civil War has already begun. To use one measure, in October 2020, the Department of Homeland Security, Trump's Department of Homeland Security, concluded that white supremacist violence was the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. A study by the nonpartisan Center for Strategic and International Studies found that white supremacists and like-minded extremists conducted 67% of terrorist plots and attacks in the United States in 2020. Compared to 20% by anarchists, anti-fascists, and like-minded extremists. In one such case, members of an anti-government paramilitary group allegedly plotted to kidnap the Democratic governor of Michigan. How did we get into this mess? What led us from the moment when Republicans waved miniature flags with Bob Michael on the Capitol steps to the moment a quarter century later when Republicans in that same place used flagpoles bearing the American flag to beat police officers and smash windows? This book answers these questions, and in doing so, I hope, provides clues that can eventually help rebuild what we've lost. As I write this, in early 2022, 6 in 10 Republicans say the 2020 election was fraudulent, and 40% think political violence can be acceptable, a Washington Post University of Maryland poll just found. A Post tally found that at least 163 Republicans who have embraced Trump's election lies are running in 2022 to become senators, governors, or other statewide officials who would have sway over the administration of elections. At least 5 candidates for the House were at the Capitol during the January 6 insurrection, and at least 12 of the top Republican House prospects have accepted the big lie. Embrace of Trump's lie has become the primary prerequisite for winning Republican primaries. Congressional Republican leaders have abandoned any attempt to punish or even contradict rank-and-file lawmakers who fantasize publicly about killing elected Democratic officials. Virtually.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?